has a child who's on the autistic spectrum, who she has to tend for that child day in, day out. What's her situation? Yeah, she is faced by the double-edged sword of poverty. Why? Because she finds it difficult to find work, because she has to be with her child. She finds it difficult to find a schooling and education for her child. So she is in a very fragile situation, because she's, fending on both sides, the child, the job, herself as well. In some places being ostracized because she has a child with disability. So this is why I'm extremely excited about this session. And this session explores how Arab philanthropy can drive systemic change to lift vulnerable communities. And we know if you want to do proper philanthropy, if you want to do magic together, we can't forget people, we can't leave people behind, yeah? So, I would like now to call Ms. Noura Salim to the stage. Executive Director, Saweetis Foundation for Social Development, to lead this session. Please give a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Happy to see everyone after lunch. And I'm really delighted to be moderating this panel. As Joyce said, it's a very important topic, looking at science and policy and how we can utilize science and policy towards really the resilience of the most vulnerable communities. Just to put a few things into context before we start the panel, SDG 1 calls for ending poverty globally by 2030. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has really halted years of progress in ending this. World Bank estimates that COVID expanded the number of extreme poor around the world by about 70 million, in addition to already all the challenges that we were previously facing in even achieving SDG 1. Egypt in particular, since we're hosting this event here today, I think has seen one of the steepest rises when it comes to food prices over the last years. It's an issue that we face every day as practitioners in the field when we talk about food security and impacting the nutrition of many, many Egyptian families. I think, again, the MENA region facing an acute water stress, resulting in issues with food production, increasing issues as it relates to multidimensional poverty. I don't want to start with a long list of, I think, all the challenges that we are aware of. But what I want to say is the great thing about today's panel is that we have practitioners such as a dear colleague, Mohsen Sarhan, with the Egyptian Food Bank, literally working with this issue on food security on a daily basis for millions of Egyptian families, as well as esteemed researchers from a number of different institutes that can talk to us about how we can use science and policy to address this. We cannot talk and host this panel without addressing climate change, so I hope that we get a chance to also discuss this with the panelists, because when it comes to climate change in our region, a big topic, I'm happy to see COP27 last year in Egypt, COP28 this year in the United Arab Emirates, because it obviously impacts vulnerable communities the most and also impacts food security as we talk about it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panelists that I'm delighted to be with and call them to the stage. Dr. Sakandra Kurdi. Dr. Kurdi is the Egypt Country Program Leader and a Research Fellow in the Development Strategy and Governance Unit at IFPRI. She's a development economist with research focus on social protection projects, specifically in the MENA region, with a high interest in Yemen and in Egypt. Dr. Sakandra is leading and participating in several projects, including Takaful and Karama, which is Egypt's national flagship project when it comes to social protection. Forsa, the Egyptian Food Bank General Feeding Program, and the Yemen School Feeding Project. So Dr. Sakandra, I welcome you to the stage. And my dear colleague, Abdurrahman Nagy. Abdurrahman is the Director of Learning and Strategy at Saweetis Foundation. He leads our transformation into evidence-based as an evidence-based donor organization. He's a principal investigator in a number of research projects, and Abdurrahman also had joined the foundation from quite a career at JPAL. Please welcome. Mohsen Sarhan. Mohsen is the CEO of the Egyptian Food Bank, the largest nonprofit in Egypt. In addition to leading the food bank, Mohsen is a member of the executive committee of Takaful Foundation, which is one of the largest and most prestigious nonprofit organizations in Egypt. He also works as a lecturer at the American University in Cairo and at the Cairo University, and is a dear colleague and partner. Welcome to the stage, Mohsen. And definitely last but not least, Ahmed Sayed. Ahmed is the executive director of JPAL, Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, in the MENA region, and associate professor at the American University in Cairo. And Ahmed leads the JPAL MENA office at the AUC, guiding strategy and growth for its research, policy, capacity building, and operation team. He's also a research fellow at the IZA Institute of Labor Economics in Germany, the Research Center for Education and the Labor Market in the Netherlands, and the Economic Research Forum in Egypt. Please, Ahmed, welcome to the stage. I see no has issue now. Okay. So thank you all for being with us today. And perhaps let me start with a question to Mohsen. And I would like to specifically, as I said, I think the Egyptian Food Bank has a lot of work when it comes to food security, working largely with children, but also with families. Again, in Egypt, there's been thankfully, a big decline in child mortality. However, we still see malnutrition rates as pretty high, especially amongst children under 5, with stunting being a big issue, standing at 21%, latest data 2014. But again, I think a big goal of keeping food security, child malnutrition, hunger in sight. Mohsen, as the CEO of the Egyptian Food Bank, and I know you have a huge operations, logistical network, taking a big, agile mindset, measures to growing and developing within the very challenging context that we faced. We know that the Egyptian Food Bank highlighted the importance of using scientific evidence through conducting randomized control trials on your general feeding program. However, my question, as an Egyptian food bank that takes a lot of donations, zakat, etc., a lot of donations from the public, and I think it would be helpful, Mohsen, in this context, with a lot of people also in the audience from outside of Egypt, to give a general introduction also about the Egyptian Food Bank. But how do you see and how do you justify the use, I don't want to say the morality, but the use of zakat and donations in particular in conducting studies? We know as practitioners in the field that people give money and they are very happy to give it to providing food boxes, for example, to family. But then when you add to it that we're also doing research, we're also doing measurements, we're also doing a lot of other things, some people think, this is not what I wanted my money directed to per se. So would love to hear from you a little bit about the Egyptian Food Bank in that context, and then specifically the answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Noura, and thank you, everyone, for having me with you here today. It's quite an honor and a privilege, and it's quite a loaded question. I like the use of the word morality. I don't think I've been asked this question before, so I think I'll try to tackle it. But before that, let me give you some brief context. So the Egyptian Food Bank, we've been operating here in Egypt for the last, coming June, it will be 20 years now. We started with a big dream to end hunger in Egypt, and I think it was in 2018 that we finally realized that's not going to happen. It's something, poverty, hunger, it's things that are part of the universe. We'll have to sustain with them forever. They're not going anywhere. And it's not a sprint, and it has never been a sprint. It's a marathon. It's a marathon of endurance, because, and it's an obstacle course marathon. So we have to keep always a very agile mindset, and always have to adapt to what's happening, and always have to manage our expectations first, and manage ourselves and our own psychology and our own ambitions in order to be able to get through to the other side. So let me break down the question to 3 parts. Let me first tell you about the Egyptian Food Bank. So we operate in very close alignment with SDG 2, particularly the 4 first sub-indicators. So we work in providing food security to people who cannot afford to get a job or can afford to get a job but with non-sufficient income to sustain them. And then we work with a mother and her children across 3 touch points through pregnancy and stunting, and then in nurseries, and then in schools, combating wasting. And then we work with small farmers to increase their incomes and increase their productivity, and we have also incorporated multiple small producers. This is a very textbook inclusive business model that we bought from the private sector. We have a target to shift at least 80% of our procurement to be from small producers and small farmers by 3 years from now, which is a very ambitious target, and we have already, I think, secured a little bit more than 20% by now. Let me also tell you a little bit about how we view evaluation. So evaluation to us, according to our guideline, we know and we understand perfectly that randomized controlled trials are the gold standard. And we understand that doing an RCT is much better, probably in most contexts, than doing any other form of evaluation. But we also firmly believe that any other form of evaluation is better than nothing. So we adopt a little bit of a flexible evaluation methodology, which spans from everything, which spans from an in-depth interview all the way up to a proper randomized controlled trials, and we've been doing them all. Because, as you all know, doing a randomized controlled trial, it's a very expensive undertaking. Expensive and resource intensive, both in time, both in thinking and designing, and then the results don't come. It takes a while. It takes a while before you really understand what's happening in that program. And we operate with zakah funds, as Noura said. So we don't really have the luxury of time of keeping the funds until there is a result, because we have to spend zakah funds within 1 year from taking it, according to Sharia. And most of our funding is zakah at the Egyptian Food Bank. Moving on to zakah, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a window that we can operate the machine that spends zakah, which is al-amilina alayha, and there has been a scholarly debate since the beginning of Islam on how much should we take from al-amilina alayha fund and to which causes. What's quite acceptable is al-amilina alayha pays for the salaries, pays for electricity, pays for that sort of stuff. But again, I don't think no one has ever tackled from a scholarly perspective in Islam whether we can spend from zakah money on doing randomized controlled trials. I don't think it happened yet. But again, if I find it and everyone finds it acceptable that we hire competent managers to lead our operations, and we believe that if not doing so, we jeopardize the whole operation of going to waste. I think from that perspective, doing a randomized controlled trial, it tells us if what we're doing, we're not just doing it efficiently, but even if we have to do it at all, does it really serve the people with what we intend to serve them with? And how's the efficiency of that service? And I think in massive programs like for example, the monthly feeding program, the Egyptian Food Bank, this program is nearing 900 million Egyptian pounds in spending a year, very close to £1 billion a year in spending. So I think doing randomized controlled trials, even if what it costs, £3-4 million, it's nothing. It's nothing to understand, is this exact intervention the most efficient way and the most effective way in delivering the service we intend to deliver to the beneficiaries? I think that's my view on the topic. I think from morality perspective, I'm quite comfortable. Allah helps us all, and I'm quite comfortable with the spending on randomized controlled trials. I have to spend on any form of evaluation, because working without understanding the effect of what you're doing on the communities, on the people, I think it's better not to do anything at all. It's better not to work. To put it in a very short form. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mohsen, and thank you for the sobering note at the end. And obviously, I agree, but I want to, use this as a segue to my question to Dr. Sakandra, because I think that there is a lot of discussion in the sector. Maybe we don't disagree around the need for evaluations, but I think there's a lot of debate around the different kinds of evaluations, the investment in evaluations when it comes to financial resources, monetary resources and time, which is a big thing. And so when we talk specifically about randomized control trials, and I want to focus on that for a minute, obviously IFPRI is conducting a lot of randomized control trials with the government. And as we were just saying, there's a lot of debate when it comes to randomized control trials, and some people that think, it's a great theoretical tool, but very difficult to actually implement on the ground when you talk about a control, how do you maintain a control, without getting into the technicalities of RCTs. I would appreciate, Dr. Sikandra, if you can give us, a high-level view of a randomized control trial in layman terms, and if you can share with us some of the lessons learned from why you would advocate, basically make the case, the elevator pitch for randomized control trials in development.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So to give kind of a really simple explanation, a randomized controlled trial is where we give some treatment to a treated group, and then we look at what's happening with a similar comparison group and measure the outcomes in both groups. Now, the reason that it's a lot of people are more used to looking at a before and after is that a lot of things change throughout the course of time. So if you don't have that comparison group, you don't know what the impacts are that are attributable to the intervention itself and what would have happened on its own or by other causes, other factors that are going on in the same time in the same context. So kind of the most classic and the easiest to do randomized controlled trial would actually assign the treatment at an individual level. And we've done some of this work. What's more common, though, and what tends to be a bit easier to do, especially when you're dealing with governments or with large organizations such as the Egyptian Food Bank, is to randomize at a community level. So you're not just comparing one individual with their neighbors, but you're comparing one community or village with another village, and that helps to avoid some kind of the jealousy that might otherwise come up. So in terms of just some examples of what we can learn from the RCT, I wanted to give two examples, kind of a positive one and a negative one. And I won't focus too much on Egypt, but more on Yemen, because that's where kind of our work has been more completed. So we have an RCT that we did of the BRAC program. This is targeting the ultra-poor. It's a model that's been used in many different countries, and it's even been evaluated in many different countries. So there was every reason to suspect that this model, which is basically the combination of asset transfer, training, and savings support, would work well also in Yemen. What we found, though, is that unlike kind of the 10 plus other countries where this program had been evaluated, in Yemen, because of the conflict context, which included the fact that there was very severe consumption shocks, so people tended to sell off their livestock just to get through that difficult period. Also, the lack of veterinary services, which meant there was a very high mortality rate. We didn't see the same impacts. We actually didn't find any long-term or even medium-term effect on consumption of this program. So that's kind of an example of something that you would like to know before you roll out that whole program as, okay, this is how we solve food security in Yemen. On the other hand, we had another impact evaluation in Yemen for the Cash for Nutrition program, which is a combination of cash transfers and nutritional training. And for there, it was very effective. We actually found impacts on stunting rates for children. We found very good impacts on minimum dietary diversity for children under 2, which were comparable to the effects that were being seen. This was not as rigorously measured, but just for comparison of the food distribution. And that matters because this was a much cheaper intervention. The overhead costs for the cash transfers plus training is around 16 to 17% compared to over 50% for the in-kind distribution. So again, that was a really important lesson, and it motivated the fact that that program has now been expanded across Yemen. And sorry, Dr. Nora, I remember that you wanted to focus a bit on the RCTs, but just to mention also in context with Egypt, that for us, as Mohsen also said, any evaluation is better than none. And I think we really believe in that also at IFPRI. We don't necessarily only do RCTs. With the TACAFL evaluation, for example, this was a regression discontinuity design. So we didn't have to actually randomize anyone in or out of the program. What we used was a technical approach that allowed us to compare households just above the cutoff to households just below the cutoff for eligibility. And so that was really helpful in terms of showing the government what the impacts of the CAFL are. It's been kind of broadly successful compared to other cash transfer programs globally. But it also gave a lot of very specific lessons to the government in terms of what the magnitude of the effects on people's consumption were, what they could really expect in terms of long-term graduation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sikandar. I think this is very helpful, and very helpful to also note that there are different kinds of evaluations, and I've attended many researcher debates on it, so we'll leave this to another session. But I want to turn to Dr. Ahmed, since we are discussing evaluations. And I think one amazing thing that happened in early 2022 was the launch of the Egypt Impact Lab by the Ministry of Economy and Planning in collaboration with American University in Cairo, with support from Community Jameel, UNICEF, Sawiris Foundation. And the Egypt Impact Lab is basically a lab that exists within the ministry to utilize evidence, existing evidence, generate new evidence to feed into national programs as it relates to development. So things like Takaful al-Karama, Haya Karima, etc. And this, I think, was quite a milestone that we are all very, very proud of. Additionally, JPAL MENA with Community Jameel also recently announced the launch of an air and water lab with a focus on generating evidence along the climate and poverty nexus, particularly with regards to air pollution and water scarcity. So again, I think a huge milestone in a field as we talk about poverty, as we talk about climate change, water, and quality of air. So my question to you, Dr. Ahmed, is considering the Egypt Impact Lab, considering the Water and Air Lab, at the end of the day, all of this centers on your ability to actually be able to collect data, to collect quality data, to utilize this data, to analyze this data, and use it for, evidence in the region. Can you talk to us a bit more about the challenges as it comes to that, and how, practitioners in development can circumvent it, and how you found, the ways to actually do this successfully?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Noura, for the kind invitation first, and for the very interesting question. So let me take one step back and explain what exactly JPAL is about. So JPAL, or Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, is a global research center that focuses on alleviating poverty by making sure that policies are informed by scientific evidence, by rigorous scientific evidence. And for this goal, actually, we are adopting randomized controlled trials, which my colleagues explained as a technique. We have been doing this for 20 years, since 2003. So this year marks 20 years of JPAL. And over these years, we have conducted more than 1,600 evaluations, impact evaluations, using this technique across different areas, ranging from labor, education, gender, climate change, you name it. So we don't focus on one particular sector. We are rather sector neutral, and we aim at fighting poverty regardless of the area. So using this technique, actually, we have been learning a lot of lessons. It's not only about doing research in itself, but also like bringing this research into the hands of policymakers to make sure that they are building their decisions on informed, they are like their decisions and policies are informed by rigorous scientific evidence, and therefore they can invest properly and efficiently and make proper decisions. It also comes together with a focus on capacity building. It's not sufficient to run randomized evaluations and bring this to the hands of policymakers and make sure actually they are doing this without building the culture and promoting the culture of impact evaluation, and it's important there. Out of this, actually, out of this interest and out of this vision, together with our partners, visionary partners who believe in this mission, as Noura mentioned, we launched together the Egypt Impact Lab with the goal of informing the Egyptian government, which invests a lot at this stage on the development of improvement of the living conditions of Egyptians, informing them what exactly the best tool that would enable them actually to reach their goals. And typically what we do is we focus on problems, and we try to decompose these problems into smaller problems that we are able to test using this technique. And then later on, if the solutions suggested in these randomized evaluations are successful, we can scale this up, or sometimes scale it down if it doesn't work. So this is pretty much, in a nutshell, the idea behind randomized evaluations and using it in Egypt Impact Lab as kind of like embedded lab in the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, and using it as a tool to inform the government in Egypt and work together towards evaluating the impact of these development programs. We have been learning a lot of lessons actually over the years, and one of the biggest lessons that we have learned, and which speaks to the topic of the session, which is adaptability and the focus on the most vulnerable, is a project that I'm very much interested in personally, but also like, in the portfolio of JPAL, which is targeting the ultra poor, which is kind of like a joint project with Sawiris Foundation. And the idea there is like to go and target the ultra poor by providing them with a bundle of services to make sure that they get out of the poverty trap. So typically, actually, what happens in most of the development programs that focuses on social security is that you support people with limited cash transfer. And if this cash transfer is not sufficient to get you out of the poverty trap, then what's going to happen is like, most likely you will be getting back again into this vicious cycle, and you would need support again in a couple of years. What we try to do is like we provide those people with a large bundle of services and different tools that would enable them to be put on a trajectory of economic and social empowerment to make sure that they are on the right track. And this happened almost like during the COVID time. Like, most of the implementation took place during the COVID time, which was like, super hard test for us to see actually if these efforts are working fine during these hard times or no. And apparently it worked perfectly well. So actually right now we are at the stage of collecting the data at the end line. We're not there yet, but we're very close. And signs seem to be quite well that, this survived this harsh test. Building on this, we're trying right now to replicate this model with the air and water labs. The idea there is, given that climate change conditions overlap with poverty alleviation efforts, mainly because the poor are disproportionately affected more by climate change, then we try to find out what kind of solutions are out there that could be helpful actually towards making their life better by making these informed decisions. So the idea is to work again with the government to try to build an embedded lab in the government that tackles these issues using the randomized evaluations and pretty much, again, bringing this evidence to the policymakers and promoting this culture of impact evaluations towards climate change. So this is pretty much the idea behind the air and water labs. And the one thing to mention is it's not one lab, it's 3 labs, because actually it's taking place in Africa, MENA region, and South Asia as well. So actually, it's kind of like joint effort in several developing areas.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. And I think I want to use this opportunity before I go to Abdurrahman to highlight 2 points. One, as a grant-making foundation, we have really been privileged to be able to work with research entities and to have research entities such as JPAL in the MENA region, such as IFPRI, who we see as our partners in evaluations, because even though we and other foundations have learning and strategy units do some evaluations in-house, I think it's important to realize that within the ecosystem there exists very expert skills that I think are very difficult to have in-house and maybe are unnecessary to have in-house, but they're available to us in the region, that understand the region, operate in the region, and are not just, not that there's, and we also work with international researchers, but that have been in the region long enough to understand the local context. So that's point 1. But then the point 2, because this was mentioned by Dr. Sakandra, was mentioned by me earlier and by Dr. Ahmed, for practitioners that are working in poverty alleviation, I would also highly recommend to look at the Targeting the Ultra Poor model, which is again a model that is led by BRAC and has been led by BRAC for a really long time, has achieved tremendous success in many countries. Obviously doesn't work everywhere, which I think is an important thing to consider, that we have been piloting in Egypt with really strong preliminary results, but we hope that the results would last and that we would be able to scale this program to hundreds of thousands of families, because it targets, the reason I mention it is applicable to our conversation because it is for the ultra poor, so it targets the most vulnerable families. And so now I would like to transition to Abdurrahman, last but not least, and I can do that from Alish, and we keep you till the end, Abdurrahman, to perhaps reflecting on what has been said and taking the view from a foundation perspective. At the end of the day, we do not have the luxury to sit and wait for a long time for long results. We have a duty towards, again, the beneficiaries that we serve to be implementing programs. And you have led, the exercise for developing our 5-year strategy. And so I'm not going to ask you why you think scientific evidence is important. I think we're beyond that in this room. But what I would like to ask you is, how have you incorporated this successfully into the strategy, and what are your guidelines for organizations that are trying to balance between being very evidence-based, wanting to be very academic and rigorous, but also being practitioners on the ground, like the Egyptian Food Bank, like us, where you have to deliver and you don't have the luxury of waiting 3 years, 5 years, etc.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noura. And actually, it's a pleasure to be among my dear friends and colleagues, Mohsen, Ahmed, Iskandar, and definitely a pleasure to be in a panel moderated by you. So when I joined Surveillance Foundation more than a couple of years now, we started thinking together about how we can maximize the impact of Surveillance Foundation, right? We have, as a foundation, we spend on an annual basis around $25 to $30 million, which is a lot, but not enough to end or solve all the poverty challenges in Egypt and across the region. And we spend a lot of time scouting for the evidence, trying to find what would be the best strategy to do this. And we found this evaluation for Professor Michael Kramer, the Nobel laureate in economics 2019, with Abhijit Banerjee and Elsa Flow. And actually, he did this evaluation for measuring the impact of a very famous program called DIV, Development Innovation Venture, right? And this program, in a nutshell, is basically a funding as part of USAID that focus on supporting programs are based on scientific evidence and funding generation of scientific evidence. And what we found that the return on investment for each dollar you spent was $5. Wow, that's amazing, right? That's basically why we said, oh, that's amazing, we should follow the same exact strategy here. And this is not only Surveillance Foundation, a lot of other organizations follow the same exact strategy, like FED, which is called the Innovation Fund for Development, which is part of the IFD, and other institutions as well, right? And this basically was the direction, the objective for us, is to focus on supporting evidence-based programs and supporting generation of scientific evidence as well. However, this was not easy because it means that we are completely changing our directions, and it's a very painful process, right? It's like completely moving from programs are based on good intentions, are based on experience, and based on a lot of other aspects to basically focus on evidence-based programs. And since we are living in the MENA region, we have very limited resources. It's very good to have JPAL and have IFPRI, but even the evidence that we are getting so far is not sufficient and enough to answer all the questions that we need. And honestly, and let me disagree with Mohsen said a little bit. We do not have the luxury of building programs are not based on scientific evidence.
We always disagree.
That's completely fine. But basically, we really don't have the luxury for doing this, right? Because basically, as far as we're investing in programs are not based on scientific evidence, we are increasing the risk of having a failure program, right? And this is a huge risk that we cannot afford with having very limited resources, right? So the only option now that we need to go for is to wait, invest. Even if this will be painful, if this will take time, if this will get everyone frustrated from waiting for a long time, but what is the other option? I can tell you a lot of successful stories in development, but I can tell you a lot of very painful and failure programs. Like for example, one program that I can mention, 20 years ago, everyone was speaking about microfinance as a magical tool for ending poverty, right? And the development community spent hundreds of billions of dollars supporting microfinance, right? However, Professors Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, Dean Carlin, Casas Maguire, and others actually conducted several randomized control trials, testing the classical model of microfinance in different countries. And the conclusion for this several impact evaluation, correct me if I'm wrong, Iskandar and Ahmed, please, that basically microfinance classical model has a very limited impact on business development, and in most of the cases, they have no impact at all. Even here, Professor Dean Carlin, Adam Osman, and Garrett Bryan, they conducted an impact evaluation that basically focused on providing the classical model of microfinance and providing a kind of larger loan size. And again, they found no impact and sometimes negative impact for providing a bigger loan, right? We figured this out after spending billions of dollars on microfinance, right? So the conclusions that we came to as Surveillance Foundation, it's a painful process, but we have to do it. It's very hard, but we don't have the luxury of spending resources or invest in programs are based on good intentions or based even on experience. We completely respect experience. We completely respect all different approaches for developing programs. But now, with having the consequences of COVID-19, the Russia-Ukrainian war, and other global challenges, we can't afford this. We can't afford taking any decision without having a very solid ground that we are building programs on. To answer your question very quickly, again, Noura, again, it was a painful experience, very long process, but what is really important here, what I encourage other philanthropic organizations to do, is to spend enough time explaining the why we need to shift the direction from the classical model of working to like an evidence-based programs. Because it's, as I said, it's painful and takes efforts from everyone. Everyone deserves to understand why we are doing all of these efforts, why we're reallocating all of our resources, why we're waiting very long to get the results out for RCTs or other different impact evaluations. And by understanding the why, probably people will be less resistance in transferring their work style from classical model to the evidence-based programs. I hope I answered your question. Very happy to answer others as well. Thanks, Noura.
Thank you very much, Abdurrahman. And see, I affirm that I said that you love talking about failures. So thank you for sharing one. But it's true. I think the things that we have gotten to learn from global evidence and Egypt-specific evidence since the existence of JPAL in the MENA region, IFPRI, and others who have focused their research here. I want to go back to sort of a quick round two of questioning to the panel and then open it up to the floor. And in round two, I want to focus more on climate change. And again, the reason for this is it affects, as I think everyone has mentioned, the most vulnerable and is a very pertinent topic at the time. So I want to go back to Mohsen and I want to understand from you, Mohsen, how has the Egyptian Food Bank been really thinking about climate change? How do you see the effects of it on the communities that you serve? And how do you advise us as practitioners in the room to incorporate, climate change somehow into our agenda to better serve the most vulnerable that I think we're all serving today?
Thank you, Noura, for the interesting question. Before tackling it, let me just comment on Abdurrahman's usual disagreement with whatever I have to say. So he's quite right. But again, it's very contextual. So the work of an entity just like the Egyptian Food Bank, it's pretty similar to the government. If the government is running a massive social service program, the government just can't pull a handbrake and wait for results. They have to continue whatever they're doing, even if it's wrong. Even if it's based on good intentions. We're very much in the same situation like the food bank. It's a very fast-moving train. This fast-moving train serves maybe close to 20 million people every year. Among those 20 million people, we have maybe 50,000 children getting served by school meals each and every day. The kids depend on that meal. Their parents depend on that meal. It's in some areas, it's probably the only meal they have. So in a program like this, you just can't pull the handbrake and wait for the results. You have to keep doing whatever you're doing and then experiment on the side and then change from within gradually. So again, I'm not disagreeing with you, but again, it's very contextual. It depends on the machine you're running. So coming back to the climate change, so we've been seeing it clearly in our work, especially in the fruit crops. So 2 seasons ago, almost all of the mango and olive crops were wiped out due to climate volatility. And we've seen it this season also in watermelons and mangoes. Probably most of you found out that mangoes and watermelons this season do not taste the same. There is a problem with them. Again, it's climate volatility. What we're doing at the Egyptian Food Bank is we've already through our Growth Lab, which is our R&D division, we're somehow trying to touch on the boundaries of what's called food of the future. So we're trying to experiment a little bit. We're trying to understand how to approach lab-grown meats. Now it's commercialized in Singapore already and in the USA. A company has just been given the license to start selling chicken that's grown in laboratories without any chicken inside. We're trying to experiment and see how we approach that. We're also trying in our own experiments in contract farming to see the effects of precision agriculture, precision irrigation, using drones, small drones in farming, using AI even to understand exactly the plants, how much water they need. But again, I feel it's beyond practitioners' scope to try to do something on the macro level opposing climate change. It's more of a government job. It's more of a policy job rather than individual entities and practitioners. But what we can do is try to come up with innovative solutions to try to mitigate the damage that we're seeing and what's happening every day until effective policies do something on a massive scale about it.
Thank you very much, Mohsen, and I agree with you. I think we also, Abdurrahman and I, are always in a continuous debate between the idealism of research and researchers and the realism of practitioners that have to operate and go on with our programming until we know better. Then we can do better. And I want to shift to Dr. Sikandra, and again with a focus on climate change and food security, and just share a few data points. So Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. It imports a total of 12 to 13 million metric tons annually. It's obviously a key food item for the country. We're talking about 35 to 39% of caloric intake per person in the past few years. An important finding relevant for policy is this trade-off between the high-value and low-value crops. And so while the high-value crops are more profitable with greater abilities to increase welfare, reduce poverty, the low-value crops may be more inclusive and more important when it comes to household food security. So specifically, I understand, given the advent of climate change on crop yield, especially wheat, the fragility that we're seeing in the global food supply chains, given the Russia-Ukraine war, what are the policy options that at the end of the day you've seen from the research that can help Egypt's agri-food system transform to become more resilient and more fair? And I know it's a bit of a technical question, but just to share a view on this important topic for everyone that is working on food security in Egypt, and if we can generalize some of the learnings to the MENA region.
Okay, thank you. This is a really important question, especially in the past year or so here with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, high food prices globally, and especially very heavily affecting Egypt as the highest wheat importer in the world. So let me give kind of responses from a few different kind of analytical directions. One is from the point of view of the farmers. So when we talk about wheat productivity, if we look at yield rates, they're very high in Egypt already. But it's not very profitable. So the productivity is also measured based on the costs of the other inputs, including labor and fertilizers. One of the things that we found in our research is that there's very heavy overuse, for example, of nitrogen fertilizers, which is subsidized by the government. And then so the farmers, I guess there's multiple reasons that they don't have perfect information and they overuse the fertilizer. Some of it has to do with the delivery time. Some of it has to do with just a basic lack of knowledge about the correct recommendations. And one of the big challenges in Egypt for farmers is that the extension system is basically non-existent. There are only, I think, less than 500 extension agents for the entire country. And it's kind of down like 90% since the levels 30 years ago. As a result, so farmers, when they want to switch into high-value crops or even think about producing traditional crops more economically efficiently, they don't have the answers that they need. So that's one thing that I think a lot can be done in terms of investing more in extension. There's been a lot of lessons learned in other countries, which we're hoping to kind of bring to the Ministry of Agriculture now in terms of digital extension, how technology can be used to increase farmers' access to information. Another dimension of looking at this is taking a step back and looking at the whole economy. One thing that IFPRI does that I've learned a lot from my colleagues who are not on the microeconomic side, but on the macro side, is that when you look at agriculture's role in Egypt from the macro perspective, there's a lot of excess labor in agriculture. So the solution is not just increasing productivity in agriculture, but creating jobs outside of agriculture to absorb the excess labor there. And that also has to do with the fact that the land size is very small. So in the long term, there's kind of a macro approach here, which is developing the whole economy. Rural development goes beyond just agricultural development, creating other opportunities outside of agriculture for the labor force. And then finally, the last dimension, which is kind of the another research domain, is from the nutrition side. So Egypt is a huge wheat importer, not just because it has a large population and doesn't grow a lot of wheat itself, but also because people's diets are very heavily dependent on wheat. And what we've seen in some of our research is that you can show a really distinct connection between the subsidy system here and what people's diet choices are. The fact that bread in Egypt costs on the world market about 20 times what people actually pay for it when they have the ration cards means that nobody has the incentive to reduce their consumption of those really high caloric dense items. And that has implications for the fact that it means that there's a lot of dependence on wheat imports, but it also has health implications. What we have in Egypt, as Noor mentioned, is there is a high rate of stunting, which is very concerning. So that's undernutrition. But at the same time, in terms of caloric consumption, you have overnutrition. So it's something we call the double burden of malnutrition, where you see both obesity and stunting in the same household, and often even in the same individuals. Egypt has one of the world's highest rates for female obesity. So one of the things that I think the Egyptian Food Bank is really interested in, and this is one of the motivations for the RCT that we're working on with them, is can you change people's diets by giving them, instead of kind of this traditional subsidized basket of staple foods or traditional basket, traditional food box from the general feeding program, can you shift people's dietary preferences or habits towards other food items that are more nutrient dense?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sakandra. And I would like to ask my panel to excuse us from the last question for Abdurrahman and Dr. Ahmed and open it up to the floor, if that's okay with you, because we have 10 minutes and I believe we could benefit from questions from the floor. And if I may ask for the person to introduce themselves and if the question is directed to a particular panelist. Please, Dr. Do we have mics? If we can be at the front, please.
Okay, I'm not questioning, by the way, the need for testing and monitoring. I'm just want to get more information about the tool itself. Now, the tool has been actually started in medicine. And in medicine, it can detect that a certain drug could treat a certain ailment for a very simple reason, because you expect the treatment in a very short duration. It failed miserably in fighting side effects, because side effects might take longer time to find beyond the scope of, I want to treat somebody, so I'm in a hurry, so I'm willing to sort of. Now, the issue when you take this and you use it in a social science is that impact in itself takes longer time, and harm could be much more important than an individual treatment. So that's the start of my question. You keep referring to it as if it's a golden standard, but you never talk about shortcomings, limitations, and if there is a possibility of an alternate solution that might mitigate some of the limitations or the shortcomings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for your interesting question. Indeed, I mean, like, you know, definitely, I mean, we're not claiming that this is kind of like the silver bullet that's going to sort out all the problems that are out there. But definitely, if we can implement randomized evaluations, then it provides you with the cleanest evidence out there on the short term on what exactly is working. However, you can design this in a way that would enable you to track down the effect over a longer period of time. Going back to the example I've given on targeting ultra-poor, for example, which is like a partnership that we have with Sawiris Foundation on a panel study that we have in Egypt. This is something that we build on from like a long history of studies conducted across several countries. I forgot the number of countries. Abdurrahman probably knows more than me. 59 countries that have applied this before. So actually, some of these countries have been implementing this for quite a long period of time, and we have been able to follow up the impact over longer periods of time. So definitely for some outcomes that we're interested in, some of these impacts vanish, you're totally right, but some of the other impacts are quite there and still persistent, even like for the second and third generation. So definitely it differs from one question to the other. It differs on the, according to the context. But again, like, you know, we can design this in a way that would enable us to learn out what exactly the longer term impacts are. One important thing is, before conducting these randomized evaluations, we also co-diagnose things together with our partners by building on this strong base of evidence that comes from previous studies that works in some contexts, doesn't work in some other contexts, and we try as much as possible to draw lessons from those that work and those that do not, and try to design things accordingly in a way that helps us at least try as much as we can to make them work on a longer period of time. I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, if I may add also, using the same exact example that Ahmed mentioned, which targets the ultra-poor, actually researchers, they were able to measure the impact after the end of the project, after 2 years of the end of the project, after 7 years, and after recently, Professor Oriana Bandera from Undergraduate Economics, they actually published a paper with the impact of the long-term impact of targets ultra-poor after 11 years. Right? So again, we are not saying that randomized control trial is the only evaluation tool that are using, but it's the best when it comes to internal validity, right? That's the only tool that can ensure that we are managing all the different aspects from impacting post-treatment or control group, right? And it's not only actually, like even about the negative side or the negative results out of it, we still are able to measure it. So our impact evaluations that we conducted with Professor Bruno Crimpon and Azam Osman about the impact providing loans with low interest, when we found a significant impact on women, we also were able to see a negative impact on how many hours mothers are spending in taking care of their kids, right? So the same tool is able actually to detect both, to detect the positive side and the negative side. And until now, this is the best tool we are aware of. Definitely, it's not, it's not able to solve the external validity challenge, but at least from an internal validity perspective, this is the best tool that we can use so far.
It's such a great question, so you can see all of us are eager to answer it. Just one thing I think that wasn't mentioned that's also important to keep in mind, you give the example for medicine. This is something where you would think that every single kind of drug that comes to the market needs to go through an RCT. I don't necessarily think that's true for every single development program. What's important is that the RCT is a way to generate rigorous evidence that can then contribute to the global literature, in which we have theoretical models of how these different interventions interact with kind of models of household behavior or models of agricultural economy. And that allows kind of the research community to slowly get closer to a full understanding of what types of interventions are more effective. So it's not every single program you need to do an RCT before you can continue, but you can look at the global literature that exists already from other contexts, and then you can see, is there something more that we can contribute, that we can learn from what we're doing? Maybe it's context specific, maybe it's a design element that you think actually is a bit different and can contribute to that kind of global knowledge base.
Yes, this is Jackie Malouf from Lebanon, president of a diabetes NGO. It called my attention, Dr. Sikandra, when you mentioned the obesity. It is a pandemic, actually, nowadays. And it gave me an idea that might be worth considering. Rather than giving people food, yes, of course, we want every person to have enough food. But since obesity is such a great issue, it's a disease nowadays, it's acknowledged as a disease. Why don't we fund, on the other hand, initiatives that are raising awareness on the quality of food? Because quality of food will definitely, reflect on the quality of life. So we would be then limiting obesity, and rather than giving some people too much food, we would be equitable by doing that. But this is such an important point because we are spreading awareness about limiting the food portions for health purposes rather than eating more than we can. So maybe we can combine the ideas and preach for better health and less food for some and more food for those who are much in need for it. What do you think? Thank you.
I would just suggest we take 3 more questions, and then we'll close there, and then the panel can address them. Please.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion. I'm Mireille Cronin-Mather. I'm from the N Fund. I have a science background, but I also spent a portion of my career focused on sustainable community development. And I'm wondering if you can share your experience about community-generated data and ownership of data and accountability.
Thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. I'm Ghufran Abu Dayi. I'm the regional coordinator for Catalyst 2030. And I actually want to build on this question exactly. So you have been mentioning RCT, for example, and different methods of evaluation. But have you been considering as well participatory approaches where the community members actually become part of this evaluation? And we usually think of communicating the evidence to the governments, for example, to prove the evidence, but have we also considered communicating back to the community what they contributed or helped us understand? And one last question. Do you usually collaborate with universities or academic organizations that can take the burden of doing the research for you? And instead of just having an evaluation for a program, it's going to be a research that everybody can actually, it can be disseminated on a wider scale, but at the same time, like if we take the participatory approach, then we are somehow communicating with the language of the people instead of the language of academia, and thank you.
Thank you, and we can take one last question. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to close it here for a time, as Naila looks at me.
Thank you. Actually, thank you for sharing this, but I found that the food security is one of the biggest issues related to the climate crisis. So I wonder, how do you take this? Sorry, first I have to introduce myself. Perihana Bulaila, Greenpeace MENA. So I just wanted to know, with the climate crisis, there are very big issues like global boiling, water scarcity. It's a lot of complicated issues. How do you tackle this, especially that it incorporates also a political level? And do you have any plans, whether some you did in COP27 or tackling COP28 while both COPs are in our region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I believe I'll just lump them into 3 questions. One was obesity specific to Dr. Sikandra. The second was around data and the participatory approach of collection of data and reporting back to communities. And then the climate crisis is a huge question, so we'll see who wants to take that one on. But let me start with Dr. Sikandra and the question on obesity.
Yeah, so thanks so much. The question for basically messaging is, it's not only about kind of what you distribute to people, but also what knowledge you give them. So I'd also like to pass over to Mohsen to talk a little bit. Oh, okay.
Mohsen unfortunately has to leave, so you can't pass over to him, unfortunately. But thank you very much, Mohsen, for your participation. Thank you.
But I will say that this is something. Yeah. This is something that Egyptian Food Bank is already experimenting in, and as I think it's a very important to see how effective that approach is at changing people's behavior. What we know from kind of other literature is that it's there's a few steps between kind of just providing somebody advice and they're actually changing their behavior. So it's not as easy as just giving that message out. But we are doing this now in our evaluation in collaboration with the General Feeding Program. What we've done is we've cross-randomized the messaging component with the food box distribution. So we'll be able to see the relative impacts on behavior of those kind of the distribution versus giving the messages.
And Dr. Sikandra, would you like to also comment on the question around data and participation from the community while we have you?
Yeah, so this is also a great question and a tricky one, to be honest. So we do kind of sometimes qualitative follow-ups with the TKAFL evaluation, for example, after we collected kind of our quantitative regression discontinuity rigorous impact evaluation. We went back to the communities and we tried to get more of a participatory approach from focus groups to understand some of the kind of surprising results we had found there. So that was incredibly valuable. It tends to require kind of really well-trained qualitative experts who know the context very well. And I think it should be done more. We don't do it probably as much as we could. The other challenge, and I'm saying this in terms of I completely agree with you, that this is kind of the goal and the ideal, but just to point out some of the reasons we don't get close there, is that especially when we're working with the government tends to want to be in control of the messages that go out to the public about how well the program is working. So we have to be a little bit kind of politically sensitive about where we do provide all of kind of our results publicly, and we're very committed to that, and then the data sharing and disseminating the knowledge. As you mentioned, it might not be fully accessible. We translate it to Arabic, but again, even once it's in Arabic, it might not be accessible down to the level of the communities and the beneficiaries. But again, there is where it's kind of a little bit overstepping from our role as researchers to go out to the communities and take on this role, especially since the government themselves would like to be the ones who are kind of see themselves as the main people taking up the research lessons.
I think Dr. Ahmed first would like to comment, and I can follow up.
Perfect. So on your question about the academic community, and we are part of the academic community. So JAIP Al-MENA is a research center within the American University in Cairo. So we are academics, and I forgot to mention that we work with a network of researchers from all over the place, from 90 universities. We have a network of 750 researchers with background, like different backgrounds in development. Some of them are focused on education, some of them are more on gender, some of them on climate change, etc. And those are the ones who are conducting this scientific evidence. It's not only about scientific evidence and publishing this in the top academic journals, but also simplifying this and giving the message out to policymakers. So I invite you actually to visit our website, where we have kind of like, explanation of the different impact evaluations with the findings and what exactly matters for not only like for policymakers, but also like, for general audience to learn about this. For the ownership of data is like a very important point. One of the things that I'm personally very proud of under Egypt Impact Lab, for example, and hopefully actually we are going to extend this in other labs, including the Air and Water Lab, is working jointly with our partners towards making use of the data that's available and hasn't been used before, to try to understand and diagnose the challenges and the problems we have, and try later on to use this data to build randomized evaluations and get deeper into the analysis so that we can figure out solutions for the problems. So actually, this is actually one of the goals that we have in our agenda.
Very, very quickly, I'll share 4 points. So first, definitely, there's a lot of researchers and impact evaluations that it's embedded on it to present the final result to the participants for the research themselves. Because by the end of the day, we would never be able to publish or to get any data without their participation and their kindness for sharing their information and all of this. So I saw a lot of debates, a lot of scholars across the globe. They are basically encouraging all the researchers to start sharing the final results with recipients or the participants in their evaluation to ensure they are aware of what exactly they participated in. That's number one. Second, in most of the randomized control trials I saw so far, usually we conduct a lot of qualitative research, but what we really need to do better is to document this kind of qualitative studies or interviews in a better way that can be published as part of the final evaluation. Third, definitely, as Nora mentioned, as a philanthropic organization, myself, I also a researcher, I'm still a PI in several projects, but still, we never conduct impact evaluation without collaboration with a research institution. That's why we collaborate with IFPRI, with JPAL, with ERF, and hopefully we worked before with the World Bank researchers. And we are hoping to work with more and more researchers. And actually, under the Egypt Impact Lab, we allocated part of the funding to invest in young scholars to ensure that we are getting young researchers from the MENA region, from Egypt, that they are able to they understand the context, and hopefully by getting technical support from JPAL side, they'll be able in the near future to conduct impact evaluation by their own service and to publish as part of their academic journey. My last point was not related to any of the questions that they asked. It's actually a recommendation for me, if you don't mind. So whenever we talk with development practitioners and with people from the development community, people they keep mentioning the challenge of having enough resources. I agree. We definitely need to have more resources. But resources is not the main or the only challenge that we are facing. We need to spend more time to think about why we need these resources. What exactly is the challenge that we are spending ourselves in? How we will be spending these resources? And that's why having impact evaluations that can tell us what's exactly working and what's not working is crucial. That's exactly what we need to focus on. One example that I can mention, Muslims are donating for zakah officially, just for zakah, every year, $550 billion. 10% of this money, over 10 years, is sufficient to end the hunger challenge at all, right? This is numbers that we are not utilizing these resources well. We need to think more about how we can better utilize this. And the only way to better utilize our resources, which we usually call them limited resources, which I agree they could be limited, but definitely there's a better way of using them, is to have scientific evidence. Again, having scientific evidence, and I'm biased for randomized controlled trials, so I keep saying this, and having a lot of randomized controlled trials can tell us precisely what is working and is not working is crucial. We don't have the luxury of not doing them. And I hope, definitely, I should mention this point before Mohsen leaves, but actually, even for Muslim scholars, we have now a lot of fatwas saying that using zakah money in supporting impact evaluations and supporting programs based on scientific evidence is definitely crucial and needed, and is approved by them. And I would highly recommend you guys to go and check Effective Artists for Muslims, where they are discussing this in greater details and discussing and debating why Muslims should invest their money and their zakah and their donations for evidence-based programs, not for good intentional programs. Again.
Thank you very much, Abdurrahman, and I think those were amazing closing remarks. The only thing I'm going to add to that is a very short quote, it's not really quote, but by the Minister of Social Solidarity from Egypt, who at an event we attended last year said, the government is very keen on really working with evidence, and that data and data collection is now halal. So I hope that we see this. I hope we see this as practitioners in real life. And I thank you very much to the great panelists. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. It was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, Arab Foundations Forum. Thank you.
Wow, lots of food for thought. Your heads must be boiling. So, I would now like to announce the start of the session on philanthropy, fragility, and the role of the private sector. So, here we are looking at how to foster change in fragile countries by taking the intersectionality lens of the private sector, philanthropy, and fragility. I would like to call Dr. Elie Abaoun peace, security, and human rights expert to lead this panel. Yes.
اوكي، مساء الخير. أنا بعرف هيدي آخر جلسة، عادة ما بحب اسمي يكون مرتبط بممارسات تعذيب، فرح حاول إنه خلي الجلسة قصيرة لحسن حظنا وسوء حظنا بنفس الوقت. في أحد المتحدثين كان جاي من ليبيا ما قدر يوصل بسبب الأوضاع الجوية، فرح حاول أختصر الجلسة ل 45 دقيقة، وهيك نطلق سراحكم حوالي الساعة 4 أو 4 وشوي. طيب أنا رح أدعي عندنا 2 متحدثات ومتحدث، رح أدعيهم يلاقوني على البوديوم بعدين بنبلش. دكتور حنان حمدان تفضلي، رانيا فزع ومجدي. اوكي، شو لازم اعمل؟ اوكي. عم تسمعوني منيح؟ واضح الصوت؟ عظيم. ثانك يو. طيب أنا أول شيء بحب أشكر منتدى المؤسسات العربية الداعمة لتنظيم هذا الاجتماع وهذه الجلسة بشكل محدد. حابب أعمل أنا هيك ملخص سريع بأول الجلسة وبعدين رح ننتقل للمتحدثات والمتحدثين. أول شيء في دراسة تم إجراءها من كم سنة فرجت أنه في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي 8 من كل 10 أشخاص في 8 يقومون بالتبرعات بشكل دوري ويعني بشكل مستمر ومواظبين عليه. إذا منضيف هيدي المعلومة لممارسات أخرى منشوفها في بلدان المنطقة الأخرى مرتبطة بقضايا الإحسان والزكاة وإلى آخره، منشوف أنه موضوع العطاء الاجتماعي له جذور ثقافية بالمنطقة يعني عميقة، وخاصة أنه هذا المفهوم يتم التشجيع عليه من قبل الأديان السماوية أو التوحيدية الثلاث الرئيسية في المنطقة، وكمان الأديان الأصغر يلي كمان متواجدة في المنطقة. ولكن مع الأسف المعوقات السياسية والنزاعات اللي شهدتها المنطقة بآخر 100 سنة عرقلت تطور هذا القطاع وعرقلت تطويره ليكون مبادراً وأن يصبح استراتيجياً. وكمان جزء من هذا الواقع السياسي هو أنه العديد من الجهات الداعمة صارت موضع اتهام واستهداف مش فقط من قبل الحكومات ولكن كمان من الرأي العام بقضايا أنه تمويل مشبوه ومؤامرات خارجية وغيره، وبذلك يعني خلقت معوقات أمام قدرتهم على إجراء استثمارات استراتيجية في مجتمعاتهم. ولكن على الرغم، وهذا الاجتماع هو أحسن برهان على هذه الفكرة، على الرغم من كل هذه التحديات قدرت المؤسسات الداعمة أن تستمر بنشاطها وأن تلعب أدواراً حاسمة في عدة مجالات، وتحديداً في مجال الدعم أو الاستجابة الإنسانية وفي بعض نواحي التنمية الاجتماعية. ولكن مع كل هالتطور وكل الإنجازات أنا بعتقد أنه هذا القطاع لا يزال يفتقر إلى الاستراتيجية والعمق والأثر، واليوم رح نتكلم شوي عن موضوع الأثر في موضوع العطاء الاجتماعي. منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا تمتلك أعلى معدل لعدم المساواة في العالم، هذه كمان حسب إحصائيات تم إجراءها. طبعاً هيدي المعدلات العالية لعدم مساواة تؤجج التوترات والاضطرابات الاجتماعية والنزاعات وإلى آخره. ولذلك يعني قطاع الدعم أو العطاء الاجتماعي يمكن أن يلعب دورا في التصدي لعدم المساواة. فإذا بدنا الفكرة أن نروح أبعد من موضوع العمل الخيري والإعانات إلى التطرق بشكل أساسي لردم الهوة بين مختلف فئات المجتمع اللي هو أو يعني العمل على موضوع عدم المساواة. وكمان يجب الخروج من فكرة التركيز على قيمة الدولار أو قيمة يعني القيمة المالية للتبرعات، لأنه بنشوف على الويب سايتس تبع المؤسسات أنه تبرعنا مليون، مليونين، 6 ملايين، ولكن ما في كلام لا عن التحول الاجتماعي اللي عم تساهم فيه هذه التبرعات ولا عن الأثر اللي تكلمنا عنه. فإذا ما نطلع موضوع القيمة المالية نطلع أكثر على الأثر والنتائج. وكمان في تحدي آخر أنه لدى المجموعات التجارية الكبرى أصبح العطاء الاجتماعي يعني شكل من أشكال العلاقات العامة، كمان يفتقر إلى الاستراتيجية والعمق والأثر. ولكن أنا برأيي القطاع الخاص الربحي يعني يجب أن ينظر في كيفية توجيه العطاء الاجتماعي لمعالجة الهشاشة وزيادة التنافسية. بالنهاية يوجد مصلحة حتى للقطاع الربحي أنه يصير في تنمية لهذا الموضوع. طبعا بعض الشركات في المنطقة لديها أجندات متقدمة في المسؤولية الاجتماعية، ولكن مثل ما قلنا ينقصها البعد الاستراتيجي. تحديث أجندات العطاء كمان مرتبطة مش فقط بموضوع الأثر والاستراتيجية ولكن الاستدامة sustainability، وأن تكون حساسة للنزاع. هيدي أفضل ترجمة لقيتها بالعربي لموضوع conflict sensitive. ولكن كمان نحن منطقة فيها كتير يعني فيها كتير انقسامات ونزاعات، وبالتالي كمان يجب أن يكون في جانب conflict sensitive أو حساسية للنزاع. رح أختم بأنه ذكر أنه صحيح أنه في إمكانيات كبيرة لقطاع العطاء الاجتماعي، ولكن مثل ما قلنا ضروري أن نركز على الأثر والاستدامة والاستراتيجية. رح نبلش الجلسة، رح نعملها أولاً رح يكون كل متحدثة أو متحدث عندهم 3 دقائق، رح أسألهم سؤال كبير شوي عام، وبعدين رح نعمل أسئلة أقصر، ونص الجلسة تم تصميمها لتكون تفاعلية مع الحضور. فبتمنى عليكم أنتم عم تسمعوا سجلوا ملاحظات وأسئلة، والمتحدثات والمحدثين رح يجاوبوا عنهم. رح نبلش مع الدكتورة حنان حمدان. أهلا وسهلا فيك، ممثلة المفوضية السامية لشؤون اللاجئين لدى مصر وجامعة الدول العربية. والدكتورة حنان تبوأت عدة مناصب في المفوضية في تونس والكويت وبيروت وجنيف والجزائر وغيرها، وهي أستاذة محاضرة سابقا في الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. أهلا وسهلا فيك. سؤال الأول لحضرتك دكتورة حنان: ما هي العناصر الرئيسية للهشاشة fragility في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، والتداعيات والمخاطر على المجتمعات خاصة الأشخاص الذين تخدمهم المفوضية السامية لشؤون اللاجئين، يعني اللاجئين طالبي اللجوء إلى آخره، وكيف تسهم الهشاشة في تأجيج النزاع والفقر والنزوح؟
شكرا دكتور إلي، وشكرا على الاستضافة. إذا بتسمح لي رح أعطي الانترفنشن باللغة الإنجليزية لأنه التحضيرات كانت في اللغة الإنجليزية. خلينا باللغة العربية. في منطقة الشرق الأوسط حاليا في على مستوى العالم وصل عدد اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء والنازحين في نهاية العام 2022 إلى 108 مليون شخص، من بيناتهم ما يزيد عن 35 مليون لاجئ، بالإضافة إلى النازحين داخليا وعديمي الجنسية والفئات الأخرى التي تعنى بهم المفوضية. إضافة إلى ذلك، مثلا إذا نظرنا إلى منطقتنا في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا، يوجد حوالي 16.1 من مليون من الأشخاص موجودين في منطقتنا، وهذا يبرز العبء والأعباء التي تتحملها الموجودة في المنطقة، والتي يتحملها كذلك اللاجئ ويتحملها كذلك المجتمع المضيف، والمجتمع المضيف الذي يعاني في كثير من الحالات من هشاشة بسبب مجموعة من الأسباب. ماشي الحال حتى. من اسباب الاسباب الاولى للهشاشه تعود الى الوضع الفقر الموجود في المنطقه. اذا تحدثنا مثلا عن موضوع بنسبة 21% من الأشخاص الذين الموجودين في المنطقة حسب إحصائيات 2017 بنسبة 21.1%. معدل الفقر عندهم هو 2.15 دولار بالنهار. يعني من معدل المدخول لهم هو 2.15 دولار في النهار. هيدا عم نحكي عن نسبة 21%. إذا عم نحكي على بلدان مثلا من لبنان، وإذا حكينا بالتحديد على موضوع اللاجئين، يعاني 9 من كل 10 لاجئين من فقر مدقع. وهذه الأحوال تنطبق كذلك على مناطق كثيرة في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا. كذلك تعاني المجتمعات التي يعيش فيها اللاجئون من عدم استقرار سياسي وأمني. هنالك مثلا protracted refugee situations موجودة في المنطقة، حالات لجوء استمرت إلى فترات طويلة. إذا نظرنا إلى الأزمة السورية، إذا نظرنا إلى الأزمة العراقية، إلى الأزمة اليمنية، إلى الأزمة الليبية، وحاليا إلى الأزمة السودانية، نجد أن هذه حالات لجوء استمرت لفترات طويلة. ومعظم اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء موجودين في 3 بلدان تعاني كثيرا، تستضيفهم 3 بلدان: لبنان، الأردن، ومصر. وحاليا بوجود الأزمة السودانية كذلك دخل مثلا إلى مصر ما يزيد عن 310,000 من الإخوة السودانيين في فترة قصيرة جدا، ويستضيفهم الشعب المصري الذي بكل كرم وبكل محبة. ولكن هذه مجتمعات تعاني، ووجود اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء فيها يؤدي إلى مزيد من حالات الضعف والفراجيليتي. بالنسبة للوضع الاقتصادي كذلك، وخاصة بعد أزمة كوفيد-19، نجد أن معدل الانemployment rate مثلا في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وصل إلى 9.6%. هيدي حسب إحصائيات سنة 22. إلى ماذا تؤدي هذه الهشاشة؟ إذا كذلك نظرنا إلى العراق، نجد أن معظم اللاجئين الموجودين خارج مخيمات اللجوء يعانون من مشاكل اقتصادية كبيرة جدا، من حالات accumulated debt، مزيد من الديون، إلى مشاكل في الإيجار، وإلى ما هنالك. إلى ماذا تؤدي هذه الهشاشة؟ تؤدي أولا إلى كثير من اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء يأخذون طريق بصعوبة، يعني يحاولون الهرب من هذه البلدان الذين موجودين في dangerous route، يحاولون الوصول إلى بلدان أخرى عن طريق مثلا كما شاهدنا في تونس أو نشاهد في كثير من البلدان المتوسطية، يحاول اللاجئ وطالب اللجوء سواء القادم من بلدان مختلفة أن يأخذ طريق البحر للوصول إلى أوروبا، وفي كثير من الأحيان يؤدي ذلك إلى خسارته لحياته وإلى التعرض لكثير من المخاطر التي يعاني منها. هنالك كذلك كثير من مشاكل الحماية التي يتعرض لها اللاجئ وطالب اللجوء بسبب وجوده في مجتمع هو نفسه يعاني من الفقر ومن عدم الاستقرار ومن المشاكل الاقتصادية. هنالك زيادة في حالات الكسينوفوبيا، وهنالك كذلك التوتر الذي نراه يزيد بين المجتمع المضيف وبين اللاجئ. وكذلك نجد بسبب معظم الحالات التي ذكرتها أن عدد كبير من اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء والنازحين يحاولون الدخول إلى بلدان اللجوء ومنها إلى بلدان أخرى بطريقة غير شرعية، وهذه تعرضهم لكثير من المخاطر. شكرا.
شكرا كثير دكتورة حنان. فعلا أرقام مخيفة أعطيتنا إياها دكتورة حنان. أنا بس بدي أعلق على وحدة منهم. يعني نحن بالمنطقة تقريبا عندنا 15% من مجموع اللاجئين والنازحين بالعالم. ما بعتقد هاي النسبة تتناسب مع مجموع عدد السكان، يعني في فرق كبير، في جاب كبيرة بين قديش عدد سكان المنطقة بالنسبة لعدد سكان العالم وقديش عنا لاجئين ونازحين في المنطقة كمان نسبة للمجموع اللي هو 108 مليون. طبعا في أرقام أخرى عن الفقر كمان مخيفة، والنتائج اللي حكيت عنها دكتورة حنان اللي هي أغلبها مرتبطة بموضوع الهجرة غير الشرعية ومخاطر الهجرة غير الشرعية والحاجات في مجال الحماية القانونية. طيب رح ننتقل شوي لزاوية أخرى لمعالجة المشكلة مع أستاذ مجدي أبو عرجة اللي هو رئيس ومدير مرفق ضمان القروض في مصر، وهي مبادرة من USAID أو مؤسسة التنمية الدولية الأمريكية ومؤسسة تمويل التنمية الدولية الأمريكية، اللي هن اسمين بيشبهوا بعضهم بس هن مؤسستين مختلفتين. وهو كمان استشاري وخبير ومدرب في مجالات المالية والاستثمار والتسويق والتنمية وإدارة الأعمال. أستاذ مجدي أهلا وسهلا فيك. سؤال: ما هو الدور الذي يمكن أن يلعبه القطاع الخاص في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا للتعامل مع الهشاشة بشكل عام، خاصة الجوانب التي وصفتها دكتورة حنان؟ شكرا.
Thank you أو شكرا دكتور إلي. To start the discussion, I really like you to have a moment of silence أو قراءة الفاتحة على ضحايا أخواننا في المغرب العربي because of الزلزال اللي صار. Thank you all for all this. My name is Majdi Abu Arja. I am the chief of party for a USAID project financed by the US government and the Development Finance Corporation. I've been in the finance field for the last 40 years. Let me start saying to the answer of Dr. Ali, in the late 80s, something was happening in the world, which is basically used to be Ronald Reagan back then and Mikhail Gorbachev back then. And things were changing, and everybody was noticing, which is the Soviet Union. And then people in the US, they were asking Ronald Reagan, how would you trust? Put 3 underlines under the word trust. Mikhail Gorbachev and his team. Then Ronald Reagan answered, which is until this moment I still remember, which is this is what the private sector actually wanted or wants from everybody. He said, trust, but verify. Trust, but verify. In the banking field, trust meaning credit. I'm gonna give you my money, which is my money, as a bank or a donor or international donor or whatever you want to say. What makes me happy is how are you gonna give me my money back with the interest due on the dates and that we agree on. The same thing with philanthropy, the same thing with donors. It's basically trust. Private sector wants to give you money. عاوزين يعطوكم فلوس. قبل شوي سمعنا evidence. Somebody said evidence here. I need evidence. When money goes to the other side, which is the beneficiary or supposed to be trustee that they're gonna do whatever you agreed on, things change. Today is not tomorrow, and yesterday is not there. It's not static. So what makes? It's trust. If you work on your, as a private sector, if they trust philanthropists, if they trust, طبعا بالعربي philanthropist فاعل خير. فاعل خير could be زكاة أو غير زكاة. فاعل خير. أنا عاوز أعطيك حاجة. What make you think that you're gonna basically cheat me. So if we need to increase philanthropy and donors to philanthropy, we have to work on ourselves first. We need to have policies there, procedures, you name it, everything, to make us worthy of them giving us money. In USAID, this is the project I manage, it's like $250 million in Egypt. If we need anything, compliance, 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 that's what I teach my people, because they won't give you anything, it's compliance, and they do impact. So a lot of things has to come with trust. Trust me, trust is the word for credit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important element. موضوع الثقة وبناء علاقات ثقة بين القطاع العطاء الاجتماعي والقطاع الخاص والمجتمع المدني يعني المنظمات اللي بتنفذ على الأرض مهم جدا. شكرا أستاذ مجدي لأن ذكرتنا فيه. وكمان مريت بس بسرعة كتير على موضوع نقاط الضعف الأخرى لازم يعني نقويها منشان نكسب ثقة الجهات المانحة إن كانت خاصة ولا عامة. شكرا كثير. المتحدثة الثالثة هي سيدة رانيا فزع، رئيسة ومديرة شركة إليفاست الكندية للاستشارات وخبيرة دولية في مجال التقييم وبناء القدرات المؤسسية. أهلا وسهلا رانيا. كيف يجب على القطاع الخاص تحديد الأثر التحولي transformative impact في سياق الهشاشة وما هي المعايير التي يجب استخدامها؟
Who has $1 million? Because if I want to say, I have to take $1 million, no? Can you spot me in the photo in front of you? Okay, this is the world we live in. And the boxes are everybody's project, program, dream. And I'm the one at the door. So confused. By the way, those who know me knows very well that I'm always confused. That's why I ask all sorts of questions. So I'm confused, as you might see, because I look inside the box, in the programs, in the organizations I work for, or I serve as a consultant, and I see clear picture, crystal. But then the minute I try to look at where they want to impact or implement what they're talking about, I got confused. And trust me, I'm very confused. So take what I would say with a lot of confusion. Do we live in a bubble as philanthropists? Do we? I'm asking you because this is what I ask people I work for. Maybe we don't like to admit it, but let me tell you, maybe I'm confused, but yes, we do. We do live in a bubble, and we are the happy few. We are. So when we speak about philanthropy, I've heard since the morning a lot of discussions about measuring, indicators. Yeah, I love measuring. Like my whole bread and butter is about measuring, but it depends what you want to measure. Yeah, trust me. And if we look backwards at this one, I don't know what we can measure if A is reaching B while every turmoil is happening there. I mean, you can work on poverty in Egypt, but no one saw the Sudanese refugee influx. Do you think that would impact the poverty in Egypt? I bet you yes, just without doing the evidence exercise. Well, the evidence exercise is important. This is what I sell for people, huh? So, what we need to think when we measure is to factor complexity and fragility into measurement, into evaluation. What we need to look at is what are the unintended products. Basically, we try to do things, we plan A to B, but we're not sure we are able to reach B. Because all the turmoil that this silly woman opening the door and looking outdoors can see is complexity. And it creates confusion not only for people who measure like me, but also for you. It's a challenge for continuous design of programs because we need to adapt and change. And hence, nothing works for 2-3 years monotonously that we can measure it after 5 years. This is, in reality, do not exist. And I bet you, put for me one program that was doing the exact same thing for the past 3 years with no change. Who want to bet $100 on that one? You know I will win. Sorry. Another issue is when we design, again back to that room, that box, we look at what we know, but we don't see the unseen. You know, you don't know what you don't know. Always keep this in your mind. As an evaluator, and this is why I link it to the confusion part. This is why I'm always confused, you know? So talking to me will create more confusion to you. So avoid me during the coming 2 days. There are people that are unseen, and there are people that are unheard, and it is hard for us to see them and hear them. But you know why? Because they choose to be unseen and unheard, because the system pushes them to be unseen and unheard, and because we do not and cannot go and see them unless we think outside that box in the first slide. Always remember that box. That visual is very important. I can share it with you. You can do lectures about it, but it's a very powerful image. So we think in the box, but the world is quite complex. What I want also to add is the relations of power. So when we design, we are in the power seat. We are behind the steering wheel. The people we are designing for aren't. But we assume that we know what they want. And this is why when I work with, so I don't do only the evaluation, so I don't do only the post. Well, I'm more painful when I do the pre, because the confusion hits even more. Like, why are we doing this? Who said this will work? Who said this is really needed? You know who? I don't know who. The donor sometimes said. We have seen, I'm old enough, although I don't look, I've seen a lot of fashion trends in development agendas internationally, and I've served in different countries, from Iraq to Morocco, so everywhere in between, including sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, what you name it, even Pakistan. I kind of reach up there. And every 3-4 years, we have a new fashion item on the agenda. And we adapt. Oh, yeah, it's needed. Oh, yeah. Who said so? Whereas poverty and inequality is the most kind of problematic issue in this part of the world, including sub-Saharan Africa, because I've worked there and I know. So we need to be very careful with these kind of issues. And the last concept I would like to float here, and it's even worse than complexity, it's what we call the wicked problem. Have you ever heard of the term before? So all the problems that we deal with are wicked, because some of these problems, the reasons why they are there are other problems. So the problems are reasons or are causes of other problems, and that those problems are being causes of another problem. There is no kind of raw data enough available, credible, to actually define the problem. So define the problem of poverty. Please, be my guest. So approaching these kind of problems, refugees issues, refugee influx in the region, internally displaced, whether internally displaced due to conflict or due to environment and climate change. There is a large economic burden of that. So this name or this term was iconned by Weber, I put, I think, on the slide the names, so you can look. They have beautiful work. We've applied some of the work in analyzing some of the problems for agencies to work on, but the main issue is, please remember the box. I'll stop for now. I think there are more, but remember the box of the first slide.
شكرا رانيا، وشكرا على التذكير بأنه المشاكل اللي قطاع العطاء الاجتماعي بيتعاطى فيها هي مشاكل معقدة وبتتطلب نظرة مختلفة عن المشاكل الأخرى اللي ممكن معودين نحن نشتغل عليها. بدي أرجع شوي لدكتورة حنان وأسألها عن من وجهة نظرك، يعني حضرتك كل خبرتك المهنية مع القطاع غير الربحي بالأمم المتحدة بشكل أساسي، بس من وجهة نظرك ما هي يعني كيف ممكن تحددي دور المؤسسات الداعمة والقطاع الخاص في مجال تطوير نهج شامل للتعامل مع الهشاشة؟ يعني كيف أنت من مركزك بالأمم المتحدة بتشوفي دور القطاع الخاص؟
بس بدي ابتدي بفكر كمان بسيط. نحن الأموال اللي وصلت للمفوضية في منطقة الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا خلال السنة الماضية كانت 100 مليون دولار، من بينها 50 مليون دولار واصل من القطاع الخاص. وهيدا بفرجيك الدور الكتير مهم اللي بيلعبه القطاع الخاص، مش بس بموضوع فقط بالتبرعات. أنا برأيي وهيدي نقطة بحب ركز عليها، مش بس موضوع التبرعات المادية. القطاع الخاص ممكن يلعب دور كتير كبير عن طريق بناء القدرات، عن طريق تهيئة أرضية للاجئ وطالبي اللجوء، خصوصا إذا مثلا كنا عم نحكي على عنصر الشباب، عن طريق دعمهم، عن طريق التدريب، عن طريق تدريب في مؤسساتهم الخاصة وتهيئتهم لمستقبل أفضل. المفوضية، وبدي أحكي هون عن منطقة الشرق الأوسط، لها شراكات، يعني مفوضية بتلعب دور كتير كبير وشراكات كبيرة مع القطاع الخاص، بس بحب ركز على موضوع الشرق الأوسط وشمال أفريقيا. في مجموعة من الشراكات المهمة اللي قامت المفوضية بالعمل عليها مع شركاء من القطاع الخاص، وهون ضمن بالتحديد المسؤولية المجتمعية ودور القطاع الخاص في الاستجابة للقضايا الإنسانية. المؤتمرات كافة اللي حكى المؤتمرات الإنسانية ركزت على دور القطاع الخاص في الاستجابة للأزمات الإنسانية. وشو بيستفيد مثلا القطاع الخاص من هيدي، من العمل في القضايا الإنسانية وقضايا اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء؟ عم نشوف انه في طاقات كبيره من اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء الموجودين اللي ممكن انه يتم استثمارها ويقدروا هن يضيفوا للقطاع الخاص من خبراتهم، من الخبرات المتراكمه، من مجالاتهم. بحب احكي عن تجربه صارت معنا من بدايه الازمه السودانيه. يمكن عم بحكي اكثر شيء عن الازمه السودانيه لانه اقرب شيء. لما ابتدى النزوح ولما ابتدى نزلت المفوضيه على الحدود وبلشنا نستقبل للإخوة السودانيين والواصلين، أول شيء بالبداية رفضوا يحكوا مع المفوضية. أول ما تقول لهم تعرفون كمفوضية لاجئين بيقولوا نحن مش لاجئين. بس بلشوا يصير في أخذ وعطاء أكثر شوي. أول شيء طلبوا أنه يكون عندهم فرص عمل، واللي قالوا أنه نحن ما بدنا نكون عالي على المجتمع، نحن بدنا نكون عنصر فعال. وبلشوا ينظموا حالهم أنه يكونوا عنصر فعال بالمجتمع ويفيدوا المجتمع اللي هن موجودين فيه. وبعتقد هيدي نقطة كتير مهمة بنقدر نبني عليها. إذا بنحكي مثلا في موضوع مصر وبنفكر قبلها بالإخوة السوريين اللي كانوا موجودين هون، كمان كانوا عنصر جدا فعال سواء بمصر أو في بلدان أخرى، وقدموا للمجتمع وقدموا للاقتصاد واندمجوا بسرعة. القطاع الخاص عن طريق تهيئة الظروف العمل، ونعرف نحن أنه في قسم كبير ممكن يكون عمل فورمال أو انفورمال، ولكن تهيئة بهيئة الظروف عم بيعطي فرصة للاجئ يكون منتج، عم بيعطي فرصة كمان إنه يستفيد من خبرات اللي جايبها اللاجئ وطالبي اللجوء، وإنه يقوي ويصير عنده الاعتماد على الذات بدل ما يكون معتمد على العمل الإنساني، أو حتى ممكن يتحول لطرق أخرى ليقدر يستمر. حتى عم بيساهم بزيادة الأمن لما تستفيد من الخبرات وتعطيه عمل وتعطيه قدرة. هيدا اللاجئ عم بيكون عم بينتج بدل ما يكون ممكن يكون حتى يشكل في بعض الحالات عنصر خطر أمني بهالحالة هي. شكرا.
شكرا كثير. أنا بعد عندي أسئلة لرانيا ومجدي، بس قبل هيك حابب نشوف إذا في أسئلة أو مداخلات من الحضور، وعلى أساسها بعدين بنكمل. تفضل دكتور عوني.
I was saying that I'm very much involved with the UNEP FI responsible banking practices. And most banks, when you talk about sustainability, they will tell you business case for sustainability. And frankly, I mean, coming out of COVID, I mean, you tell them it's about fragility, it's about collapse, it's about the system falling down on you. We've seen this in COVID. I mean, in a matter of week, we were all grounded home, supply chains were halted, and whole businesses were stopped. The same thing could happen with climate change. I mean, all of a sudden, and the problem with systems, when they collapse, they don't collapse gradually. I mean, a house, yeah, could give you science, but it collapses, there is a tipping point, and then it crashes. The systems are like that. So all of a sudden, you're gonna find yourself, I cannot go out because the rays from the sun will actually give me cancer or will kill me or whatever. But apparently they do not understand this because it's not happening. So for them, a business case is, yes, I recycle aluminum, for example, because it is actually cheaper than starting it from the beginning. I do certain things because it kind of give me a certain image, not because altruism. Now, the only way you force altruism is by governance, ecosystem governance, government enforcing this, or communities saying them, I'm not gonna buy from you unless you do 1, 2, 3. Otherwise, it's not gonna happen. So this is just, I mean, I don't know if that's, thank you, sir.
Thank you. That's a very useful and sad description of the reality, that the private sector will not move unless there is top-down pressure or bottom-up pressure. But this is, I agree, this is the reality today. تفضل.
A question to Rania, actually. My name is Rani. I'm the CEO and co-founder of URA. So my question is, so you say that in order to evaluate impact, or even to forecast what's the impact of my donation, so there's a lot of direct and indirect things, macro, micro, geographic, cultural, economic things that may affect the result in the end. So what's the solution? Shouldn't we try to evaluate or forecast the impact? What should we do?
So if you're expecting an answer that gives you like a one-statement solution, I don't have that one. I'm sorry, I failed the test. But what we can do is the second part of what I will be presenting under the second question, which is some of the ideas and steps and processes that we need to engage in. And when I say this is a process, I mean it's a process. It's like building trust. And it is setting expectations, because if you go to your donor and you tell them, listen guys, what you're asking is too much, and we cannot guarantee that we will reach there. It's better than telling them, yes, give me the $1 million now, and after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, they will come and see that you did nothing, or you did very little from what you have described. So there is a complete kind of process around this, and we will be diving into that in the second part of the discussion.
Can you proceed with the second part, please, since we're there?
All right. Sorry, can I ask please to show the presentation again? So I have some kind of bullet points to tell you. First, don't define the agenda up front, meaning you don't go to the community saying, oh, I've noticed this problem, so I have a solution for you, a solution that a magician brings out of the rabbit hat. So you need to engage more, and I've put here, so how we look at it, it's more as an integrated approach. Layers, or the whole ecosystem, so layers of engagement along the way, because you need to, not to define the agenda, but you need to identify what also the communities want with the communities. And this is a very important question. Are you doing it for the community, to the community, or with them? Okay, because the with them is a lot of important thing. Because trust me, communities do not like to feel that they are the guinea pig that you are experimenting on. No, they want to be, if not in the driving seat, the co-pilot seat. So they want to be on the table. They want to tell you what's happening, and you need to go there and to understand it, so that when you craft your plan, it is nearly can be implemented. The other thing is, please work with the non-usual suspects, meaning go to people who usually don't come to you, who are the invisible. They are there, but we don't see them. It's not their problem we don't see them, it's our problem we don't see them, but they are there. I was engaged not very long ago, like 6 months ago, in an evaluation, a huge evaluation of a 5-year program on job creation in southern Tunisia. For those who don't know, southern Tunisia is a part of the country that's the most impoverished, but also like all these boats migrate from there, but also a very large bed for what they call terrorism and so. And then when we go and ask people about the impact of that 5-year program, apparently people, youth specifically, they didn't only want jobs, they want social mobility. But for us, sitting in this beautiful, maybe not us, but those similar to us, sitting in an air-conditioned office, would say, yeah, create jobs, solve the problem. But it's not only create jobs, it's social mobility, it's access, it's accessing the banking system, it's accessing resources, it's being seen, it's being not discriminated against in the system or the political system, and what have you. So these are the people that we need to engage with in order, so if we're serving them, we need to serve with them. The other thing is to work more on local knowledge and what is there in the communities. What I tend, I have my master's from Canada and from Australia. I've been educated in the Western system. I am a national of a foreign country, and I understand very much that there is a lot of difference between research that we can implement in the West and here. And I've worked on both spectrums. And I've also worked in agencies that fund research in the Middle East and Africa. And I can tell you of kind of years and hours of discussions and hair pulling between me and my colleagues around the issues of how do we do research in the region? What kind of methods we use? What kind of tools? Do we do focus group discussions? Like, people who know me know I hate focus group discussions. Just don't put people together, because some of the outspoken, like me, I can outspoke everybody. I can speak until tomorrow. But there are some people who do not. but they have something to add. So there are tools and methods that you can engage with and in to do things and engage with people. And one of it is the research. So this, like, one of the major challenges in the Arab world is knowledge production. We do not produce, we consume. And part of the problem is that also we consume research methods that are already packaged and that we never produce. We never even produce a tool, a research tool. Why? Because there are the golden standards, but who set these standards and for which communities? And this is what we need to think about. Really, I know that what I'm saying is not what people like to hear, okay? But I'm sorry. The last idea is to support networks amongst us, share data amongst us more, try to experiment. Failure is a good thing if we know how to learn from it. It's an interesting exercise if we know how to use the data of the failure to do a better job. So that's a little bit of some tips. I wouldn't call a recipe for or a solution, but just try. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. The second one that's going on. في محاولة لإسكاتة. طيب أنا عندي سؤال لمجدي وبرجع بنعمل another round with the audience. مجدي دكتور علي طرح لنا فكرة كتير مهمة هي كيف ال private sector is always asking for a business case to engage. من خلال خبرتك مع القطاع الخاص كيف ممكن واحد يقنعهم؟ يعني كيف ممكن واحد يعمل لهم business case؟ شو الانسنتيفز غير التراست؟ أنت بالأول أول مداخلة ركزت فيها على التراست which obviously بعتقد يعني شغلة كتير مهمة، بس أكتر موضوع الثقة بناء الثقة شو ممكن واحد يفكر لنكسب هذه العلاقة؟
شكرا على السؤال، بس انت قصدك البنك.
كل القطاع الخاص.
Private sector meaning some kind of venture capitalist, some kind of angel, some kind of صح? No, but they're looking for finance. The reason I'm saying this is because this is where it leads. It leads to the banks in general, or of course even private equity and others. They themselves are entrusted with the depositors' money. They are entrusted with the owner's equity. So if you do not have a winnable case or a sustainable case or a good business case, they cannot take risk because it's your money at the end, her money, his money. They're using, as per law, 88%, depending on the central bank ruling, depending on the time, 88% of the money extended to borrowers are from depositors' money, and 12% is from the owner's equity. So at the end, it's your money. If I give it to A and B and C, somehow they have iffy projects, I can't. And go back to systems. What is the probability in general that a case like COVID-19 would happen again within the next 100 years? The probability is 100, meaning tomorrow we'll have something. That's 100%. But these, if you look at the previous 100% or 100 years, it happens maybe once or twice. Yeah, but this I'm putting you in how the banks think. System, if you understand what the CBE did, the Central Bank of Egypt implemented really huge measures to help small business and regular, really. Like a banker cannot file a lawsuit against a borrower that do not know or close this business or cannot pay the rent for 12 months. You cannot file a lawsuit. Tough luck as a banker. You can't. That's CBE. And of course, other banks did the same thing. You cannot even ask for something. You could always give him money, but you cannot ask for payment. And you cannot increase interest rate. So challenges.
طيب كنت متوقع جواب بشجعنا أكثر شوي بس ماشي
No,
الحال.
Dr. Eli, this is really the misconcept. And the word, if you look historically, trust is equal to credit. So banks work on credit. So trust is credit. So there's a lot of misconception. I stop here.
Great. Another last round of questions actually لأنه قربنا ساعة. تفضل دكتور عماد. Microphone please.
Thank you. I'll give you some hope. But let me start with the concept of fragility. You know, for the longest time, it has been the haves helping the have-nots, even in our community, right? And but the situation has changed. I think right now the fragile are helping the fragile. It's the less fragile helping the more fragile. It's like, you know, the one-eyed leading the blind. Now, it's not that sad because I see hope in it. Because one is, we understand more. I mean, those who are fragile, they understand more the needs of the other fragile. So that's one. Two is, also we know what they want because we suffer from the same thing and we're looking for similar solutions. And three is, they identify with us, okay? And they're not afraid. They don't question our intentions because they see that we are as affected as they are. And you know, what led to this is what happened during the August 4th explosion in Lebanon. Really, it was people who were affected. Everybody was affected. You know, putting your pain aside and trying to help those who were in more pain. Unfortunately, again, that's the situation of most of the Arab countries, and you can see it. You know, the well-to-do, the less fragile Egyptians helping the more fragile Egyptians, the less fragile Sudanese helping the more fragile Sudanese, and so on.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad.
Yes, thank you. My name is Walid. I work as a philanthropic advisor, so I work a lot with foundations. So I wanted to actually get your perspective on what would you recommend that philanthropy does in terms of responding to crises, and I think more importantly, anticipating crises and being able to step in. We live in a world that's continuously more volatile, and with climate change, we know there's going to be more and more happening. So how could we do a better job on the philanthropy side to support your work in anticipating and responding quickly to crises and fragility?
Thank you very much for the question, and that shows also a lot of intention. I think starting first with partnerships. Partnerships is very important to be able for us to exchange information, but also to plan ahead on the role of philanthropy and others. And I think there has been several experiences in terms of UNHCR, for instance, in different countries for partnerships, as I said, with philanthropy and others, but also networking and sharing of information. It's the starting point, I think, and I think this is the main thing: partnership, sharing of information, and planning together the way forward.
Thank you. Any other question, comment? Great. طيب أنا بعتقد صار وقت ننهي الجلسة. بس أنا بدي فكرة واحدة أنهي فيها لأنه بالنسبة لي كتير مهمة. رانيا حكيت عنها شوي اللي هي موضوع إنتاج المعرفة knowledge production. نحن بالمنطقة مثل ما قالت رانيا we are mostly consumers، يعني بنستهلك معرفة بتم إنتاجها بالخارج، بتم ترجمتها، ببعض الأحيان بينعمل لها adaptation وبنستهلكها نحن. وأنا برأيي هيدي عم بساعد بضعف المنطقة. فأنا بتمنى هلا لأنه في مؤسسات داعمة وفي ناس يمكن عندهم إذا مش هون موجودين بس عندهم influence أو تأثير على أشخاص آخرين بالمنطقة. مهم يكون في يعني موارد كبيرة مخصصة لإنتاج المعرفة، يعني يكون في research agenda واضحة متفقين عليها a network of philanthropic organizations بتغطي المنطقة كلها لنبلش نحن ننتج معرفة من المنطقة نفسها. أنا بعتقد إذا ما بلشنا نعمل هيك رح نضل عم نستمر بحالة المراوحة والهشاشة اللي نحن فيها. والمسكونسبشن الكبيرة بهذا الموضوع انه هذا دور الجامعات. وانا بقول لكم انه هذا منه دور الجامعات، لانه الجامعات اذا كانت ربحية، وهذا حديث كنا عم نحكي امبارح مع دكتور عماد واخرين، إذا كانت ربحية طبعاً ما رح تخصص جزء من أرباحها لموضوع البحث والأبحاث، وإذا كانت غير ربحية الهاجس تبعها هو السرفايفل، وبالتالي ما رح يخاطروا بمبالغ كبيرة ليدعموا ريسيرش، خاصة أنه في أزمات مالية واقتصادية وإلى آخره. وبالتالي الدور الأساسي بالريسيرش أجندة هو مش القطاع الأكاديمي، هو شريك منفذ، ولكن التمويل لازم يجي من القطاع الخاص والجهات الداعمة. فبتمنى أنه هيدي الرسالة تضل هيك علقانة يعني as a result of this discussion. شكرا مرة جديدة للمتحدثات والمتحدثين. ما بعرف مين بده يختم نهار، في حدا رح يجي.
Thank you very much for a great session. We are coming to the end of the first day. And just before we close, just a couple of logistics. You're probably going to laugh, but somebody has dropped a big wad of keys. So I don't know if you've dropped some keys. They are sitting with a gentleman over there, Walid. Another piece of logistic that I would like to reiterate is that the buses will leave to the Western from here at 4:30. Then the buses will leave the Western at 6:30 for the dinner and the reception. So if you're going to join the transport, please be there because there's traffic. And another piece of information regarding tomorrow. First of all, we're going to be welcoming you at 9 o'clock tomorrow for coffee, and then we'll kick off at 9:30. But then there is a bit of a change in the agenda. Highness Princess Lamia is unfortunately unable to join us. So instead, we've decided to build an additional hour for networking tomorrow morning from 10 to 11. Actually, it'll be, we would love to have that session, but it gives us an opportunity for us to connect on a person-to-person basis. So please, let's use it, okay? So it's been a very fantastic day, full of so many ideas. We've had boxes and confusion and clarity, all sorts, but we're gonna actually reconvene, Naila and myself, tomorrow, where we'll be sharing all our learnings together. So for now, go and stretch your legs.